Welcome to this forum for candidates running for State Senate District 35. Senate District 35 covers Andover, Anoka, Ramsey, and parts of Coon Rapids. I'm Linda Rogers of the Anoka, Blaine, Coon Rapids Area League of Women Voters. We're the sponsor of this forum, along with co-sponsors, the North Suburban Optimist Club and the North Metro Chamber of Commerce. A quick note to those of you who have watched Meet the Candidates over the years. The COVID situation necessitated a couple of changes. There is no live audience. We are taping this forum with a skeleton crew appropriately spaced and masked off camera. Also, we're taping early in the election season so that all voters can have information about candidates before casting their votes. All candidates were invited to this forum. The League of Women Voters does not support or oppose any political parties or candidates for office. The League does help citizens become informed voters and advocates for important issues. So that's what this evening is all about, informing voters. If you're interested in the League, visit our webpage at lwvabcmn.org. Women and men and young people are invited to join. For the position of Senate District 35 Senator, the candidates are incumbent Jim Abeler and challenger David Nelson. The candidates will start by answering 3 introductory questions that they received in advance. These will be followed by questions that have been submitted by the public via our website and questions of importance to the League of Women Voters, the North Suburban Optimist Club, and the North Metro Chamber of Commerce. We will end with closing statements from the candidates. Answers are limited to 1 minute, and candidates will take turns being the first to answer a question. I'll hand it over to our moderator, Karen Varian.
Thanks, Linda. I'm Karen Varian, a League of Women Voters member and a resident of Blaine. I'd like to welcome the Senate District 35 senatorial candidates, Jim Abeler and David Nelson. We're going to start off with the questions the candidates were given in advance, and you'll have 1 minute per question to respond. The first question is, describe your background and community involvement. And we'll start with Jim Abeler.
Well, thank you for having us tonight. These forums are really important, and thanks to the League for their activities, and I really appreciate the chances to have these. There aren't really very many forums at the Senate level like this, so I appreciate that. So I grew up in town. I graduated from Anoka in 1972, went to Lincoln School, and played baseball at the park and all the little rec league stuff. And I lived here my whole life. I went off to college at Hamlin and came back, and I never thought I'd come back to Anoka, and then I thought, well, it's a pretty good little town. And so it's grown and grown, and so now I've really appreciated being part of the community. We raised 6 kids here, played sports, been to a number of different churches in the area, and really made it our home, and stole my wife away from St. Paul, and she's actually gotten to appreciate the area as well. And so I'm a 41-year chiropractor. We founded PAC Charter School. We helped with the Hope for Youth, and we had quite a hand in getting the Haven for Heroes going. And it's nice to be in a position here. There's really no glamour in the Senate thing, but it's a lot of work, and it's a privilege to give back. So thanks again.
Thanks. David Nelson.
Hi, my wife and I moved to Coon Rapids in 1996. We've lived in the same community, involved in our church and involved in our local housing association. And I grew up in Brooklyn Center when Brooklyn Center was the end of the world practically. When my parents moved in 1957, 694 wasn't there. My mother was a part of the League of Women Voters, and she was part of the housing or the commissions that took Brooklyn Center and Brooklyn Park into cities from Brooklyn Township. She talked about all the reasons they moved to Brooklyn Center, mainly because they couldn't buy a house with a conventional loan in Minneapolis, and they were forced basically to move out to the suburbs. When we were looking for a home, we found that living in Coon Rapids was more affordable than anything we could find in the Plymouth, Brooklyn Center area. And so we've enjoyed the years we've lived here, and I've been involved with the politics and our local association, and glad to be here.
Thank you. Next question is, why are you seeking this office? And we'll start with David Nelson.
I'm running for our office because of the idea of choice. And late in the session, there was nobody really standing up to run. And I really believe that you should always have a choice. This is a pretty traditionally Republican district, but if you don't give people a choice, they don't have a vote. So my primary initiative for joining the race was to give people a choice, to represent the part of the district that is maybe not as represented as they should be, and to speak to that and to give Jim a little bit of a challenge. He's had very few solid challengers in the years that he has run for office, and that's my goal, for just being in here for choice and giving people a choice to choose between two candidates.
Thanks. Jim Abeler?
Well, thank you, and Dave, I want to thank you for running. And actually, there's been quite a good crew of people over the years, and other admirable individuals who choose to serve. And I don't take it for granted. I've been here longer than I never thought I'd actually be in office. That was not an aspiration of mine. It just worked out, and there was a gap, and I thought, well, I think I could do that. And as it's worked out, I've developed some seniority, which helps. But that just means you know people, and you know things, you know the process. And so helping Anoka schools, helping set up some community efforts, helping with getting the highways squared away and keeping the environment clean, helping the higher ed institutions like Anoka Tech and Anoka Ramsey and the U and the ones that people rely on so much, helping each child have a chance to succeed, to get to post-high school if they would like to do that, to get a chance to get a degree or a trade skill, and to be all they can be. We're competing not with Iowa, but with the world. And so how do we do that? And I'm privileged to do that, and we've had quite a bit of successes. And in a minute, you can't describe all that, but I hope to do more of that, and there still is a fire in my belly, so thanks.
Thanks. What are your goals for Minnesota's future, Jim Abeler?
To be as great as we can be. We have amazing individuals. Government is not always very good at what it does. It tries, and it generally means well. But the people are resilient, and they have their own dreams, their own goals. And my work in government, part of it is to keep it off their back, to make it as practical and useful as possible to accomplish our mutual goals without helping us trip over the downsides of that. And a lot of work I do these days is with people with disabilities. We just had some success in helping keep Rise and Achieve and Options up in Big Lake open with some emergency funding that we had some challenge getting past the administration. And it passed unanimously out of the Senate 3 times. And finally, we got it to go past the House to rescue these places. And so each person having a chance to be all they can be is what I'm still after, and helping them thrive. And I wish I had more time. I'm sure it'll come up in more questions. But a minute doesn't go along to tell you all your dreams, but I have a lot of them, so thanks.
David Nelson.
My goals are to represent diversity, inclusiveness, with which comes to safety and reform that the citizens are looking for. Also to distance a little bit, or a lot of it, from some of the national agenda. I think in this state, our GOP has moved towards a more narrow agenda that doesn't really include everybody. And I think with the narrow margin that the Senate has and the GOP, there needs to be an answer to that. This last session, there were multiple bills that were very close, and the votes were very close. And I want to represent the people that were underrepresented this last session. This next term for Senate is only 2 years. We're going to be facing tough choices with money, and we're going to be facing tough choices with where we set our priorities, and I want to help represent that.
Thank you. We'll now move on to our other questions. First one is, you discussed your goals for Minnesota's future. What is the goal you would put at the top of your list, and how could this goal be achieved? David Nelson.
top of my list is public safety. There is a movement to reform the police, but there, at the same time, you need to have police. There's a movement to speak about the systemic racism in our areas, and there is more than you would think in the Anoka area. And number one goal would be to listen, to learn, and to be part of the discussions, then to help move the discussion forward and pass the bills that need to be passed to address some of the blatant issues. And when you're a senator, you're not just representing your district, you're representing the whole state. And so working with the other senators on both sides of the aisle to have meaningful goals on reform is the number one priority, I think, in this next session.
Jim Abeler.
Well, thanks. Well, I'm known to be a collaborator, and I'm known to engage people and to listen. And some people, when they get to St. Paul, become suddenly very smart and they know everything. I realize I don't know everything, and I learn a lot from as I travel around. I ran for the U.S. Senate, got to see all of Minnesota 4 years ago or whatever, no, 2014. And so that made me a better senator of this area. I became more of a state senator. And so I try to lead by engaging and by listening and bringing people what we really need. It's going to be some really challenging times. And frankly, my experiencing and balancing a budget that we went through in 2011, where we had to manage the human services budget, which is the most sensitive budget of all. We serve like 1.1 million people with something, is going to be facing us again. We are going to be close to at least 10% short of our budget. No one has ever grappled with a problem that deep, and so it's going to take a lot of listening. These kind of forums help, so people just now plan to engage and tell us how we can manage our budget with this challenge that's ahead of us that is, frankly, nobody's fault.
Please describe any experiences you have owning or managing a business, as well as specific advocacy efforts on behalf of the local small business community. Jim Abeler.
Well, thanks. I am probably the poster child for small business. We have a modest chiropractic clinic in town. I own some property, which is full of small businesses, and so I see every day how COVID's affecting them and how the regular government influence may help or hinder what they're trying to do. Big fan of clean water, clean air, and you have to find a way to manage that into putting it into a practical way that people can actually stay open. There's been quite a dialogue about how to handle the COVID thing. And with the shutdown orders, I was just personally very troubled that Peterson Shoes and Anoka and all the Main Street stores couldn't be open and even have a chance to be open, while Walmart was allowed and Target was allowed to open with no rules whatsoever. And so if you're interested, I gave 14 speeches on the Senate floor. They're on my Facebook page, and trying to be respectful. So how do you disagree with your governor and still be polite and find a way to work with them? That's been what I've been trying to do with the small business, and thank goodness they're allowed to be open again. But there's many challenges ahead and much work to be done together to remedy that.
David Nelson.
I have not had my own business of my own. As president of our housing association, it is a small business, it's a nonprofit. We ran a clean budget, and prior to that, when I was growing up, I lived next door to a neighbor that started his own small business, and he just retired. Actually, was Cardinal Towing, and he started out with the back of his pickup and grew that into a business. I worked for him. Also, in my teenage years, I worked on my great uncle's farms, and we had one of my great uncles was a staunch Democrat, and the other one was a staunch Republican, and they taught me both sides of the business. They taught me both. They worked together on everything, but they disagreed on a lot of things, politics. The 4 summers I spent on the farm, I learned everything there is to know about all the farms, because my one uncle took me to everything, every type of farm, every situation, and taught me the rules that they lived under. And that was a really great experience.
If elected, what would you do to provide for a healthy business climate? David Nelson.
A healthy business climate depends on not only the businesses having a place to have business, but having the employees that can afford the products that they sell. We've grappled with the minimum wage in Minnesota. We've grappled with union memberships in Minnesota, and I think that's eroded in the last many years. When the budget first came up, deficit came up, the first thing out of the leadership of the Senate was, let's renegotiate the contracts. And I think you need to have, businesses need to have a stable labor force, they need to have an educated labor force, and they also have to have a chance to succeed. And that means you cannot have overburdened regulations, but you also need to have a playing field that's there for the businesses to provide their niche in the world, especially the small businesses.
Jim Abeler.
Well, the rules are different than before. If this forum was 2 years ago, we'd have a whole different discussion about regulation and opportunities. Now we're talking about survival. How do you help keep a business open? And with all the feds put $2.2 trillion into a rescue package. By the way, the whole U.S. GDP is $21 billion. And so our national debt is like $24 trillion, which, by the way, is a lot of money. And so I don't know that the feds are going to be in a position to rescue all our small businesses. So what is the state going to be able to do just to help them through? And that's really a hard question because we're short as well, 10%. And so a cavalier, oh yeah, we'll fix it, is going to be hard. And so as a landlord, I've tried to be kind to my tenants, tried to relieve them some. Part of it is helping them stay open and function safely. The delay in having them open in the first place caused a lot of unnecessary harm. It is going to be really hard, but we're all going to have to work together and find our best answers with the people that are actually the small businesses and the big businesses.
Thanks. What do you see as the greatest need or challenge for youth in Minnesota, and how, as an elected official, would you help solve this problem? Jim Abeler.
Well, if you would ask me that question 2 years ago, I would have given you a whole different answer. The problem right now is they need to see their friends. They have been cooped up since March, and we can discuss, maybe it'll come up, later as a question about what do you think about all that's going on. But children need each other. The reports of children taking their own lives and attempts are way up. The stress in families, I'm not gifted at teaching, and if our kids are grown, but otherwise we'd be teaching them at home. And how does that work into their relationships? And kids love their parents, but not for all day. And on sports, and how do we get them back to something that we would think of as normal? And that's a whole different minute that I would have described now than I would have at all 2 years ago. I would have talked about opportunities and parks and clubs and sports. But now can we just get them back so they can appreciate each other and have a chance to interact in some safe way? And that is really still a challenge. And I would like us to be more collaborative in help solve that problem.
David Nelson.
One of the things that the current situation has brought to light is when you don't believe in something at the beginning, you pay for it in the end. So the people that thought the COVID was a hoax, the people that thought that the schools didn't have to make any changes, the people that have been fighting that are now scrambling because as the schools in the South have put kids back in school, they've now reclosed. And so even though I think it's a great thing for kids to see their friends, it's also more important for those kids to be alive in 10 years. And so until we get a handle on this epidemic, and if we would have shut down and done the things we needed to do at the beginning of that pandemic, like they did in some foreign countries, and there's some foreign countries that never completely shut down. They wore masks to school, they wore masks to business, they took this serious. And we're still not taking it serious. And they're still fighting about it at the national and even local level on what they should do. And I think we would have been way farther along if we would have taken this initially. So kids need to be alive, and that's what we need to focus on.
As an elected official, what would you do to ensure we have clean air and water now and into the future? David Nelson.
Minnesota's been working on the Clean Air Initiative, and I'm for that. Our utility companies and our power companies, there's a balance you have to strike between the future and what we have now. You can't just immediately go to a carbon neutral, carbon negative environment, and we need to work And the current plan we have, we need to strengthen that. I believe in the governor's plan on how we move forward with clean air and clean water. We also have to invest in technology that's going to allow your car to get 1,000 miles of charge, because at 300 miles, you're going to run out. So there is technology that needs to be invested in. There's some mining that needs to be invested in that can be done in Minnesota safely, that's going to allow us to get to that next level of technology. And technology is going to bring us to that point where we can have clean air and clean water and maintain the current level of how we live. We're just getting there, but we're not quite there yet.
Jim Abeler.
Well, thank you. And I don't even know that we disagree on this topic. It's everybody in Minnesota, well, just most everybody, really wants clean air and clean water. And I'm really concerned about how much mercury is out with fish and all that. And we've not done well on that. And part of that is a global, at least, matter because the stuff blows in. But Minnesota has stepped up. We passed a sales tax where we put money into clean water and much projects about that. If you ask anybody, they're committed to clean water compared to like some of the countries where they're just like China, where they spew out massive fumes. We were there a long time ago, but we've really evolved to a place where even the debate is about, should we do this or that? How about a little more of this, a little more of that? But if you look at the numbers of money we spend today, it's quite a bit. The challenge is not going to be to do more, because there's not going to be more of anything. Just I'm going to be the harbinger of what's happening. But we're going to find a way to prioritize. And the challenge now is to keep the priority of the money we have and efforts toward clean water strong. That's going to be the real fight.
How would you use this office to promote public safety and safe interactions to minimize the spread of COVID-19? Jim Abeler.
That's a lot of questions. So if it's all about COVID, then we can tell you it's not public safety about public safety's sake. Well, actually, we've done a lot of things. And my concern from the beginning was not about a hoax or not, is it real, but what is the best way? And what has happened in Minnesota is the governor, who I have tried to collaborate with, decided he was going to be the person to take over the reins of everything. We've had 161 days, I think, of an executive order where we've been told what we should be doing, and with very little interaction back and forth. Between the middle of March and July, I made 13 outreaches to the governor in a formal way. He finally called me in July. And my only objection to what we're doing is that bring us in. Bring in me. I represent 80,000 people. Those 80,000 people have some thoughts. Maybe there's a thought on there that we make it do better. And we have actually not done well. Far too many people have died in nursing homes and in facilities, way in excess of what it should have been, while we focused on things like Main Street. Not to deny anything, but working together, you can get more done. And I hope that that's going to happen as we move into the next months.
David Nelson.
On the COVID front, I believe our governor's done an excellent job, and I think the numbers show that people agree that he has. He's been hamstrung by the fact that he's had to fight hard against the federal government to get the things we need here in Minnesota. And then there's a community that doesn't want to do what needs to be done. The greater question of public safety is a buy-off by the public to be safe. If you want to be an anarchist, and if you want to disobey, if you want to go mask-free to rallies, you're not providing into the public safety. You can't just look at public officials as the only component of public safety. It's the public that has to be safe. And I think one of the problems we've had this year particularly is this group that thinks that they just can do whatever they want. And the problem is with freedom is when your freedom infringes on my freedom, that's where government needs to step in. And that's something that I believe our governor and our executive branch has done an excellent job. But they've been hamstrung by some of the restraints that have been put on them by the people that don't want to do what needs to be done.
Thanks. Thank you. Considering recent events, how would you address racism in the state? David Nelson.
First thing you have to do is be part of the solution. You have to admit that there is racism. Having a negative view, having prejudice isn't the ultimate piece of racism. It's the power. If you have power and you have prejudice, that's where you're racist. And When you look at 20% of the population is being blamed for 50 or more percent of crime, then you have a problem. We need to bring in all the groups, we need to bring in people, and we need to recognize that there is a problem and be part of the solution. And as government officials, we need to look for common sense, and we need to also listen to the people. The number one thing we can do is listen. As a European American person, I need to make sure that I'm empathetic and I'm listening to the people that are on the street and are involved on a day-to-day basis.
Jim Abeler.
Well, it's good to be able to solve this problem in 1 minute. So there's actually two pieces. There's the racism part, and then there's a police part. And maybe there's a police question coming. I'm going to talk about the racism part. I've talked to a number of my friends, and I asked them, help me understand this. And they told me, and I've always been thoughtful and interested in everybody, and I've never thought of myself as a racist at all. I loved everybody. And they told me that to be average, they felt they had to be above average. And I have to admit, I didn't ever understand that. Because that didn't matter to me, because I treated, like if you're a person, I was this one person, I wouldn't even put your race in the top 10 things I describe you as. I'd say you're good looking, good dresser, really smart, we work on stuff together. And other people, I was talking like that. So I think part of it is to understand how it looks from someone else's eyes. And I think if we could do that, we'd be a long ways. Because I don't think anybody intends that. But it seems like it's true, and if we can admit that it's true, then we can find a way to counteract that in how we deport ourselves and in our world.
Do you think the statewide police reforms passed by the legislature this summer are moving Minnesota in the right direction? Explain.
Well, I'm glad I separated my question.
Yep.
So on the police part, I happily supported that. In my view, I believe we're very fortunate. I think the Anoka County Sheriff, the Anoka Police, the Ramsey Police, Coon Rapids Police, and Senate District, and then Andover is run by the sheriff, have been exemplars in how to treat crimes as crimes. And I think that the county sheriff told me that they just don't put up with anybody reaching into disparities and pulling over a black person or some other person more. They just don't tolerate it. And I think that I think a lot of the policies that Anoka and these other sheriff and the other forces had put into place, maybe in Minneapolis, which has some really good policemen and some others that have a bad reputation, we wouldn't have been there. The array of things that we passed, no chokeholds, no warrior training, and the list of things where you actually would do things that everybody in this audience and watching thinks make sense are going to make a big difference. It establishes a floor, but still, we have to continue to make sure that people are treated fairly.
David Nelson.
The reforms that were put in place this summer were a good head start. They are the bare minimum. They are the things that the GOP and the Democrats could agree on, and that was good that it passed. We are lucky in Anoka that we have departments that have looked at this before. We have a county sheriff that has exemplified the inclusiveness, and we need to be the model for the future. We have a few major cities that have a lot of work to do, but then we have the cities here in our districts that are doing a pretty good job. And yet, we need to be part of that discussion statewide. The Senate and the House and the governor started this summer. There wasn't the time that some people wanted an all-in-one solution. Racism, systemic racism, police reform is not going to happen in one session of the legislature. It's not going to happen in 1 month. It's not going to happen in one bill. It's a process, and we need to be part of that process.
Do you support laws that require background checks on private gun sales and red flag laws which give law enforcement the ability to confiscate weapons from those believed to be at risk to themselves and others? David Nelson.
The red flag laws, as long as they're administered correctly and they're not just on a whim, I believe years ago we had that. If you had a family member you thought was in danger, you could call the police and they would help you confiscate those guns. Because of the movement away from that, we now have to move back in that direction. The red flag laws I support. Closing the loopholes on gun sales You have to allow for private family transfer of guns, inheritance of guns, but we need to close the loopholes where you can go to a gun show and walk out of that gun show without any background check just because for a few minutes you know that person and it's considered a private sale. That's the one loophole we need to close, and we are lucky in Minnesota. We do have really good gun safety laws. And the one thing that people have to realize, it's not about controlling or taking guns away. There's no Democrat that wants to take your guns away. We want people to have safety in their homes, and we want the people that use guns to be safe.
Thank you. Jim Abeler.
Well, thank you. And I do want to just comment, not a rebuttal, just a comment. There are people who want to take guns away from people. And it doesn't help in the discussion about how can we be safe. And so the question is, there's mechanics about how to make people safe. And then there's one of the ideas is to discuss who shall I get a gun. But I want to remind everybody, whatever laws we pass, criminals still have them. Chicago has some of the tightest gun laws, tighter than we're ever going to pass. And it's the murder capital of the country. And so you have to move from what would make me feel good like we did something to what will actually work. Let me comment about the red flag idea. So there is a way to help get a gun away from somebody who should not have their gun. But it has to be a fair process, because in people who are not getting along, they sometimes make false charges, and many police forces will not endorse and enforce red flag laws because they don't want to get their officers shot. So, sorry, a minute wasn't long enough for that. I apologize.
As an elected official, would you work to support MnDOT's strategies to promote electric vehicles, including accelerate sales and use and build out charging infrastructure? Explain. Jim Abeler.
Electric cars are catching on. We actually have 2 of our own hybrids, and it's the future. And the challenge is storage. And so the better batteries get, the more we can move into all kinds of renewable fuels and cars and so on. The challenge now is they can go a couple hundred miles. I think my son's car gets 19 miles on his charge and he kicks into gas. So it's good if you're just commuting. But so just remember, so MnDOT's plan costs money. And remember, we talked about how we're going to be short 10%. And so if I say, yeah, let's put more charging stations out there, which we probably need, what's that going to do to the money we have available for schools and for the people with disabilities and roads and all the other, and the environment and the challenges, the things that we really want to have? I think the electric car idea is moving on. It's catching on to people, and people are wanting it. The way you drive a change like this is by consumer demand. The demand is building. Different companies are making it available. And then as they're more available, there'll be just a demand for more charging stations. So I'm on track with that.
David Nelson.
I believe the MnDOT's in the right direction. We also have to balance the current budget situation. When you're talking about electric vehicles, you're talking about the 10, 20, 30-year plan. If in 10, 20, or 30 years from now, the number of people that have electric vehicles increases, the charging stations need to be there. So where do you jump into that market? Where do you, as a state, promote that? And you can promote that through business incentives. You can promote that through giving tax credits, tax breaks to people, businesses, small businesses that allow charging station. You don't have to put a government infrastructure of your own. You could start with having at the rest stops. The plan that's in place does need to take a little bit of a backseat right now to the budget deficit that we're going to be facing. And I think MnDOT understands that. We're having trouble getting money for replacing roads in Anoka, let alone putting electric charging stations in. So we need to work in that direction. The number one thing about that is we need to get the batteries to be able to handle longer life charges.
Thank you. Do you believe people convicted of felonies who are living in the community, not imprisoned, should have their right to vote restored? David Nelson.
I believe once you've paid your debt to society, you should be able to get your right to vote. There needs to be a process in place. You need to be not just out on parole. You need to have you committed a crime, you need to complete your commitment to that sentence that you were given. And then I believe the number one way you make a person a contributing member of society is to give them the right to vote. If you disenfranchise people for a mistake they made when they're 18 years old, and you never give them a chance to be part of the group of people that elect their public officials, then you've basically disenfranchised them the rest of their life. So I believe there should be a path to returning to be able to vote.
Jim Abeler.
Well, I just want to point out, actually, since it's a League of Women Voters event, as election reform comes, whoever wants to do reform, if it's Republicans and Democrats, I'm just going to tell you a little secret, they all see who's this going to help the most. And any reform that comes forward is looked through that lens. And so I don't know the lens of what felon voting is going to do. I have no idea. I think it's going to split and be fine. But I think the problem is less about voting and more about the unreasonable length of time that people are on paper after they're out. Some people have probation and parole for like forever. And that's unreasonable. That's a cruel and unusual punishment, I think. But if you did a really bad crime and you spent a year for a murdering and then had parole for 20 years or whatever, that's something to talk about. But I've read about this, and so you look at the sentencing idea. What are we sentencing people for? There's people still that probably can't vote that were arrested for some modest amount of marijuana possession. And so when we change laws, the people that have been convicted of that law should at least get the benefit of the change. Thanks.
Upon the completion of the 2020 census, Minnesota will draft and enact new district maps, what we call redistricting. The state legislature is responsible for drawing these maps. Do you support the current process, or would you propose changes? Why or why not? Jim Abeler.
Well, I've been privileged to sit through a couple of those. And I believe in each case, the courts decided. And so we should just either say, well, courts do it, or find a different way. And part of this election coming up is who's going to control the different bodies, and will that let one group just do whatever they want? Frankly, if you look at whatever one group wants to do, it's a lousy plan because they're looking at, again, at benefit both sides. When they put up their plans, like, really? That wasn't a very fair plan. So I favor a commission. I favor that a group of people who are as disinterested as can be, a bunch of judges that are fair-minded, and a group like that would at least be bringing forward a plan that we would accept or reject. And that way you'd keep our hand in it. I don't know that we can be totally taken out of it, but I don't think that we're, frankly, is that fair to call us not responsible? But I don't think the system is amenable toward a fair plan if that will actually pass. Because it's, again, about who can control, especially when the power is so closely divided as it is. One seat can make a difference in so much. So that's my idea. I'm not happy with the old plan, and I worked to get it to change, co-authored a bill, and I didn't win.
David Nelson.
One of the things this election is about the redistricting. Who controls the Senate, who controls the House. But I agree with Jim that a commission might be the best input for that. But that is a future idea. The laws for that probably would come after any redistricting this time. One of the byproducts of the redistricting that has happened in the last 20 years is they took Coon Rapids, a city that had a district of its own, and they split it so that there's representation in Coon Rapids, for example, with every other city around it. And they did that to break up a strong Democratic district. That was gerrymandering, and they did it on purpose, and they did it to change some things. Some people even say that some of the districts we have could technically be seen as an illegal district. So if we have a split government again, it's going to go to the courts. If we have one party in charge of the House and the Senate, there may be a chance to have a set of rules that a commission or the members can agree on.
Thank you.
But that's the challenge. It's part of this election.
Thank
It is one reason why I'm running.
Which one issue do you think is most important to work on with legislators across the aisle? David Nelson.
One of the things I think that we need to make sure happens, and I know Jim has done a pretty good job of this, is reaching across the aisle and talking to your fellow legislators, fellow senators from the other party, being tuned in to what they need, their bare minimum, what they believe, and not just being in the corner, up against each other, us against you. And we need to get back to more of that. We need to have the cross-member gatherings, we need to have the cross-member communications, and we need to continue to work on the things that all Minnesotans want. Because if you think about it, 30% of people are GOP staunch, 30% of the people are Democrat, staunch Democrats. That leaves 60% of the people that are independent. If you only support your 30%, you're not supporting the other 70%. So we need to make sure we work in a common sense whenever possible.
Jim Abeler.
Do you mind repeating the question? I want to get the right nuance to my answer for you.
Which one issue do you think is most important to work on with legislators across the aisle?
Okay, thanks. Well, there's something that I think that actually can work. I have a lot of aspirations for things I'd like to work on, problems that are transportation funding and the environment and so on. But one thing that I've been successful and need to keep working on is people with disabilities. So Senator John Hoffman and I worked very tightly together to the point that both our leadership were aggravated. We were such good friends, which is actually what I think the model should be to solve a lot of these hard problems. We were able to work together to find a way to fund, I mentioned earlier, Achieve, Rise, Options in Big Lake, and hundreds of places across the state serving about 40,000 people with disabilities in day services and employment services and so on. Much more needs to be done there. He and I led to moving individuals like that into more independence. We changed the state policy. He and I, along with a group called ARC and a bunch of advocates. And so we've turned the corner on a better life for people with disabilities with more respect and more freedom and autonomy. More will be done with that to make that happen. And I'm optimistic, wherever the election goes, who's ever in charge of the Senate, that he and I can keep working on that. So I hope I can go back to do that. Thank you.
Okay, this next question kind of piggybacks on that. What do you believe to be key elements of compromise? Jim Abeler.
One of my key elements I'm actually cheer for honorable, it has to be honorable, but also it's best to keep my own opinion out of it. I have beliefs and I have information, I have information, but I have an opinion. So if I can keep my opinion out and try to find the consensus in the Venn diagram, you got the, where's the easy place to build on? So if you can get some easy agreements where everybody else, well, sure, we want to help people with disabilities, well, how should we do it? You can kind of move a little more into the more challenging parts of the agreement. And at some point, you have to recognize that's all you're going to get. And when you recognize that's all, then you go like, that's actually a pretty good package. And by agreeing to that package and wrapping it up like we did on this last disability package, then next time, there's trust that's been built with the people you're working with. And they go like, well, they kept their word. We got this passed. And now you move into the area where there's a little more challenging dialogue and you chip away at it. Though other ways not to do, that's my best way and it actually works.
David Nelson.
Compromise comes from understanding what the other individual you're working with needs, wants, believes, and finding the mutual agreements and working on the things that you disagree. There are always the bills that come up in the House and the Senate that are non-controversial and they pretty much should get voted straight through. And then there's the few that we always hear about that there's hours and hours of arguments about and a lot of floor speeches about. And unfortunately, that's the way it works. And the things you have to do as a leader in the legislature is you need to make sure that you understand that the other party is also there with the same belief that you are, that you're doing the right thing for your district and your state. And when you realize that, you can find common ground and you can work towards what's good for everyone in the state.
Thanks. This is our last question, and it's how can public participation and transparency regarding the legislative process be improved? David Nelson.
I believe we're pretty lucky in Minnesota. I think some of our county and cities need to follow where the meetings are online in the state, the calendar's online in the state, there's multiple video streams in the state, and this last session, if you look at it, it showed that we were prepared for distance legislation. There was the ability for the people of the state to watch. And that transparency is there. We need to promote that. We also need to get away from working all night long so that you do things when no one's watching. And there are times that happens. There's times that they get to the omnibus bills that you're going to run into that. But one of the things that we did see this year was the need to using the computers, using video, using the streaming, is the public was able to see sometimes more than they did before, because the legislators had to be visible to be able to do their jobs.
Thanks. Jim Abeler?
Well, I'm really glad you asked, and it's kind of a softball question from the league, and like that's what you all want people to do. But please, people, get engaged. One of my favorite things I tell kids when they come down to the Capitol is, who owns the Capitol? Somebody said, Jesse Ventura. Like, no, Jesse Ventura doesn't own the Capitol. You own the Capitol. You have 1/5 millionth of this. You can't take the bricks home, but it belongs to you. And please take good care of it, because we'll all be gone someday, and then you're going to be running this place. And so people are nervous to get a hold of us. I am just a Main Street guy. The average senator and representative, as fancy as you might think we are, we're just your neighbors. And talk to us like we're your neighbors. Bring the concerns you have. Talk about your concerns about your business, your education, the roads, the wetlands, and all the things that you could think about, equity issues, all the ones that are on your mind. And help us learn what's on your mind and help us set the agenda to work on some of that stuff. And then help us with the resolution to that. It really, really makes a difference. Most people don't if they're nervous or whatever, but write a letter, just get a hold of us, and it will surprisingly make a difference. We actually need that.
Thank you. You now have 1 minute for your closing statement, and we'll start with Jim Abeler.
Well, I want to thank the League for this forum, and I just want to remind people it does belong to you. And this seat is not my seat. I'm privileged to sit in it. I'm honored to be here. I've attempted to be open-minded and listening, and I have many things that I believe that I've based upon what I've known. I'm always open to new information. And if you don't believe that, ask people who disagree with me that I listen to, and I actually can change my mind and do better. I don't know all the answers, but I'm committed to make a difference. And I'm just honored to get to serve this great area, Anoka, Ramsey, Coon Rapids, and Andover, and all the fine people that are here. And so you do have a choice. And it's a free country, you get to vote. And I'm hoping that I've earned your vote or will still yet earn your vote. And I promise one thing, only 3 things. Work hard, do my best, and always tell the truth. And that's my commitment to you, and I'm not going to stop doing that. So thank you again very much, and God bless you all. This is a great state, and you're great people, so thanks.
David Nelson.
I entered the race because I want to make sure that people do have that voting choice, that we are representative of our people. Minnesota Senate is not just Anoka senator. It's not just one part of the state. You need to be the senator for the whole state. And right now, with the majority that we have, I believe they have taken a turn following the national lead, where the old Republican values are no longer the party's GOP values. I believe they've moved to the point where we need to have a check on what is going on with the agenda that is being unleashed. We're in the fight for our democracy, I believe. And I believe we need to have that choice to vote. That's why I'm running. Jim Abeler's done a good job as our senator and as our House, but he's one of many. And when the time comes, he can say very conciliatory things, but when he comes to vote, he votes with his party. And we need to put a check on that and give people a choice in this district to give them another opportunity.
Thank you.
And I hope they vote for me.
Thank you for sharing your views with the public by participating in this Meet the Candidates forum. Thanks to our co-sponsors, the North Suburban Optimist Club and the North Metro Chamber of Commerce. The League of Women Voters has supported informed voting for over 100 years. In the year 2020, we have many options of how to vote. Exercise your right to vote. For voting information, visit mnvotes.org. Thanks.